Hey, Vanessa.
Hey, Adam.
Today we have Eli Lake, columnist and reporter for The Free Press, a contributing editor for Commentary Magazine, and the host of Breaking History podcast. Hi, Eli.
Welcome back.
Hi, Adam. I'm so glad you called me back.
So we are reunited here because there is a war. If you remember, Eli, the first time we had you on, we spent a good 10 minutes, I think, trying to debate whether there is such a thing that bears any meaning called neocons, whether the title applies to anyone present, and whether we should all just identify, as I suggested, as rabid imperialists. So now that clearly the neocons have taken over the world, how are we feeling about this, Eli? Is it cool to be neocon again, or as the neocons showed that their secret cabal in the State Department is just so ineradicable?
Neocon. Time to sit back and unwind. It's pretty amazing because 10 years ago, when Trump was running for office, the original word on him was he's associated with the alt-right. You remember he was asked about David Duke by Jake Tapper, and he didn't know who he was, or he wouldn't condemn him. And then, his remarks at Charlottesville. So he was like seen as the avatar of the anti-Semitic right. And now he is their bête noire. Funny how that happens, right?
Right. And I will remind listeners, so obviously the word neocon, I should lodge that caveat because my friend and former boss, Jonah Goldberg, would pull hair if he heard using the word neocon so blasé without the actual historical context. And of course, the original neocon movement is not a group of conniving Jews trying to bomb the rest of the world. But of course, this is what a portion of the, I don't know, media sphere, podosphere has been using the words to describe it. It's both the right and the left.
For 20 years now, since the Iraq War.
20 years since the Iraq War, right. The word is describing all those idealists / cynical portion of American foreign policy that just wants to bomb places, pretend to install democracies, and steal the oil. Right? That is basically
but
what
you're saying with people assume a Jewish cabal undertone, like Jewish hawks.
Of course, because who else would care about bombing Iran and Saddam Hussein? If not, we would never be entangled in all these wars were it not for the Jews.
If it weren't for them.
But for Jewish influence.
I see, yes.
But interestingly, we are amidst bombing Iran under the policy of Donald Trump in an alliance with an alliance with the State of Israel, but seemingly with two separate agendas. So before we circle all the way back to the way this war is being covered in the U.S. and in the network of Carlsonites, Tucker Carlsonites, tell me, what is the war looking like, and what do each of the countries trying to achieve here?
It's a total quagmire. At this point, we know that classic mistakes that armies always make is when they just wipe out their enemy's leadership, because that means there'll be even more hardline leadership to come in. And then add to that, Israel and America have made the classic mistake again of taking out Iran's Navy, missile production capabilities, most of its missile launchers, and air defenses, which I just think is, the writing's on the wall. Another horrible defeat for the Western alliance. Because there's an infinite supply of lunatics in Iran, and I'm sure their command and control is going really good.
No, and also the biggest mistake is that they did it so quickly.
Oh, I know.
If you are going to take
exactly.
the Navy, please make sure to stretch it as long as possible.
Yeah, do it over like 2 years or something, right? I mean, it's just, I'm not saying that we can confidently declare victory yet, because I believe that the real victory will be a color revolution in Iran. But I also think that a color revolution in Iran is, I would say, in the cards. The notion that the current struggle over the Strait of Hormuz, when You're getting, what you certainly have seen. They've been firing at ships, but they haven't shut the entire strait. So far, it's possible that they could send out their mines, but we have pretty good intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities and precision strike capabilities that, we just took out an underground storage facility for their short range missiles. So I believe this has been like the number one mission for Central Command. That's the U.S. regional kind of grouping for now 60, 70 years of the Strait of Hormuz. I think they do have plans for this. And I would bet on America and Israel at this point. And add to that the Israelis have done something remarkable, which is they've demonstrated the capability to operate small military drones inside the country and taking out the siege commanders and the individuals and the facilities that are the kind of arm of repression for that society, which is, only 6-7 weeks after the slaughter of January following the last major national uprising, the last of many, I might add.
So if listeners don't know, the Basij is basically the Iranian Gestapo.
Yeah, it's the religious militias, yeah.
Is the true believers, or seemingly the true believers, are associated with the Revolutionary Guard that handle the internal repression of dissent.
Right.
But to understand, because Adam's initial question was like, what are the goals, I think, how close are we towards achieving those outcomes?
How do you understand the two separate goals of the Israel and the U.S.? Because they are not necessarily aligned in terms of what an end game is.
I push back against that conventional wisdom too. President Trump announced the war on February 28th with a message that said this will give the Iranian people a once-in-a-generation opportunity to take their country back. And it's up to them. That's exactly what the Israeli messaging has been. Now, Trump has not emphasized that, but I actually think that he's shown his resolve. I think he's perfect. I think he's entirely aware that the Israeli part of the war is taking out the Iranian leadership. I think we have seen demonstrated almost science fiction-like abilities of Mossad in terms of the penetration of Iran. The Israelis are ghosts in the wires of their traffic cameras, their telecom network, and everything else in between. Not to mention, they've obviously recruited lots of agents. We know this going back, none other than Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president, acknowledged in a 2024 interview that there was a mole hunt that was set up in the Revolutionary Guard to find the Israeli moles. And the guy in charge of the mole hunt was, of course, an Israeli mole. So this is an unprecedented amount of pressure. Add to that I actually think the combination of the economy and deliberate hits on Bank Sepah means that it's going to be very difficult for the regime to pay the salaries of their goons, whether it's the IRGC or the Basiji. So that's another pressure, not to mention the moral pressure for any Iranian, even if they are, yes, they're true believers who are brainwashed into this ideology of the state, but at the same time, not everyone's a true believer, and they have to look around and they've seen their neighbors being slaughtered for simply protesting an incompetent, corrupt, repressive bunch of rulers who they hate. I just think all those factors will eventually mean the end of the Islamic Republic, thank God. And I think it's quite possible. I just wrote a piece for the Free Press that started with, let me see if I can find it. Here's my opening paragraph. Imagine hundreds of thousands of Iranians marching through Tehran to the Majlis. Buzzing overhead are armed drones controlled by operators 1,000 miles away in Israel. The deadly checkpoints and dungeons where protesters were once slaughtered and tortured are now rubble. As the crowd approaches the legislature, the old flags of a sword-wielding lion and rising sun are unfurled. Some may dismiss this scenario as neoconservative fan fiction, but as Theodor Herzl, the ideological father of modern Zionists, famously quipped, "If you will it, it is no dream." And as the war for Iran moves towards its fourth week, the Israelis are exerting their will to create the conditions for a revolution that Iranians have tried and failed to incept for more than a quarter century. That is what I think the real state of the war is at this point. So anyway, and that's why I'm optimistic.
So in terms of laying the conditions for revolution, what's the evidence there that we're seeing? Are we seeing kind of activity from folks organizing something happening in that way, in that regard?
Well, we know that they've organized national uprisings before, and it's been a leaderless organization. That's not unprecedented in Iranian history. In 1905, what's sometimes called the Constitutional Revolution, there was no individual leader. There's also a long tradition in Iran of a kind of, military leader on a white horse that comes in and unifies the country. So there is some hope. Some people believe that could be Reza Pahlavi, the exiled crown prince of the Pahlavi dynasty that was toppled in the 1979 revolution. I'm not entirely sure that he will be that person, but he's one option. There are efforts now from the Iranian diaspora that has obviously been driven out of the country by these fanatics that are finally organizing a kind of coalition group that's called the Iran Freedom Congress. I wish them the best of luck. But I think that there are kind of people on the ground, and I think that there will be this opportunity. The evidence is also on the negative side, which is that the jails, the police stations, the individuals, there was an amazing Wall Street Journal story which reviewed a recording of a conversation between a Mossad operative and a senior Tehran police commander. And in the conversation, the police commander said, "I'm already dead. Come and save me. We're not going to stand in the way."
The Mossad agent was calling as part of a scare campaign that they were calling multiple people in key positions, supposedly.
We know who you are. We know where you live.
Lay down your arms, open the prisons, let people go, and you will be spared. And he says, what do you want me to do? I'm already dead. I need saving.
What we're really talking about is trying to reverse the balance of fear. I'm trying to say that right now the people are afraid to go outside because they'll be slaughtered again. What Israel is doing by openly exploding checkpoints with drones and openly, using crowdsourced information from apparently Iranians who are saying, no, the bad guys over here. And then they just killed the leader and the intelligence chief of the Basiji. They just killed, they killed the head of the Revolutionary Guard. They killed Ali Larijani. What I'm saying is that all of that has this effect. And then they're attacking the ability of the regime to keep their thugs in line. If they can't pay the salaries, and that's a huge pressure, and along with everything else. I'm not saying that the revolution would happen tomorrow, but I think the conditions are there, again, where you're reversing the balance of fear. And that's the key thing.
But reversing the balance of fear is
to go for broke.
Right. I mean, it is, as somebody who is sincerely happy to see this regime crumble, and I don't dabble in hope often, but I really do want to see the Iranian people reclaim their country from this tyrannical. But
it's not dabbling in hope to notice these things that are happening. That's not like, we know they're upset because they did it before and look at the value of the rial. We're talking about actual concrete actions that are aimed at, again, dissipating the fear the regime holds over the population. And at least as a human being, I can say, okay, you know what? That could work. I understand that.
The cracking. But the thing that the next stage does require an organized takeover by Iranians. And first, we don't know yet what part of the population will still, rally behind the regime or the fallen regime, or as a counter revolutionary force once the regime topples, and how much discord that's going to sow. It's not going to be a trivial amount of people who have had their stake with the regime, whether because they're true believers or because that's been their life and world, and they're not ready to see somebody take over and completely punish them or replace them. There's been a lot of talk about, if there's regime change, there should not be de-Baathification, which is a good point. Don't make the mistake of actual total de-Baathification. Give people from the old regime a chance to redeem themselves in whatever comes next.
Well, a little de-Baathification is good.
Some purging is important, right?
DIRGC-ification, I guess.
Right, but you can't do it entirely.
No, you can't. You can't wholesale fire the army. Right, correct.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And then have millions of disgruntled ex-regimites just waiting in the wings for the opportunity to insurrect. So the details of how this gets handled in the coming months and years could go many, many different ways. And so far, because we do not have a clear, Charles de Gaulle that people can rally behind and bring back home.
Maybe Reza Pahlavi is that person. It's maybe.
But right, maybe, but there's a lot of concern that because unlike with Charles de Gaulle and the exiled French government, this is not a matter of a couple of years. The Iranian diaspora, the Persian diaspora has been out of the country for decades. Some of them, without even bringing in the fact that Pahlavi evokes the Shah and the reason why the Islamic Revolution happened in the first place. All of these things are tainting the picture in a way that makes me worry that it could be that the regime collapses and we're still in this chaotic power vacuum and this entire civilizational territory falls into something that we're not anticipating. Let's say that this is at least the most understandable concern of critics of the war, the ones who are not merely looking for any justification to blame the Jews, but the ones who really are, have learned from the humility of the Iraq war that we are not very good at predicting where the next step is going to happen, especially in the Middle East from which we're so culturally removed. So how do you grapple with that big gaping unknown?
Well, I have a couple responses to that. I mean, one is one of the most important, profound questions in all of life is compared to what? So anyone who's like, well, I mean, there's going to be a lot of instability and chaos if this regime falls. I'm like, well, this regime is the source of chaos and instability throughout the entire Middle East. And they were dead set on getting a nuclear weapon. So I think almost anything would be better than the survival of the regime. The second point I would make is that the Israelis have been studying the target of Iran now in earnest for like 25 years, and they've managed to figure out the most ingenious ways to assassinate the scientists and leadership. They've hacked, the traffic cameras and the industrial grid and everything else. And so my question is, do you think the Mossad doesn't have a few plans or tricks up its sleeve for how to identify individuals? There is, by the way, pretty detailed transition plan that Pahlavi's organization has put together, which I think looks pretty good. But even if it's not him, I just think that I kind of trust the fact that it's pretty obvious that Israel, at the very least, is waging a regime change war, that they might have a few ideas for what comes next, and that they have gotten a pretty good read on Iranian society. And I also think the Iranian people are ready for freedom. And I've been covering Iran's democratic opposition for some time, and I just know that there are certain things that would immediately come to mind that they would do. They would get rid of the office of the supreme leader. There would be some sort of transitional justice. And then at that point, because you're right, you don't want to do whole-scale debathification, a lot of the kind of technocrats in the government would stay in their posts. There would be a schedule, maybe over 3 years or 2 years, where you would get to national elections, and you would then kind of, restore the Constitution to what it was before 1979. All that seems pretty reasonable to me, and I think that there's enough... There are enough people in Iran left that want that I just don't think that, I don't think you have the risk of seeing a Syrian civil war or, Sudan or Congo or something like that. I think that there are a good chance that you would be able to put together something that would come next, a transitional council. Maybe, depending on who makes deals, you could see the president Pezeshkian, who's managed to survive the leadership strikes. Maybe he's open to playing a role as a kind of reformer, moving forward into the transition. He would obviously have to say that in a persuasive way. Once you start taking down the leaders, and there's a good chance you might see people wanting to cut deals at that point, especially if they think their families might be at risk.
What do you think is the biggest mistake the U.S. or Israel can do at this point?
If they ended it too early and there was still a capability left that Iran might have to terrorize the region, and they could claim victory and then slaughter people in the streets if they left and they were able to do that, that I think would be an enormous mistake. But that's why I'm so cheery. That's why I'm so optimistic, because what we're seeing now, what Israel's done in the last week and a half or so, is going directly after the instruments of repression. So if you allowed the regime to pull another slaughter like they did in January, that would be terrible. That would demoralize and it would set back the ultimate goal of a color revolution. But I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think Israel's going to do that. And I also think that it's a possibility you could see the Americans stopping combat operations, but Israel's Mossad network and drones and capabilities would remain, and you would have a ceasefire in the sense that there's technically a ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon, but Israel strikes when they want to, pretty much, and nobody cares.
So basically bringing the mow the lawn policy to Iran.
Well, but it's like
a much wider scale.
It's a little different than mowing the lawn. Mowing the lawn is like you're going after a terrorist group. This would be like mowing the regime down. You're taking out, regime leaders, and you're weeding, and then you're preparing the ground for that revolution. That's, by the way, the idea of preparing the ground for the Iranian people to take back the country, that is the Israeli war strategy. That's not wish casting. That's a real thing.
Right. That was the separation of policy that I was describing, because Israel is clearly very intentional on that explicitly. And
yeah, but I think Trump knows what Israel's doing. I think Trump, because of what Trump has said about they're going to have this opportunity to take their country back, I think Trump gets it. I don't think J.D. Vance agrees. I don't think that, maybe parts of the U.S. government maybe don't agree, but yeah, I think Trump gets it.
The U.S. is walking a tighter political rope on the question of what to do to get there.
Yeah, which is what I was curious about in terms of, like, since you're a history buff, Elon, you would probably have more in your back catalog here. But like, are there examples of in which the U.S. has kind of set the conditions for regime change in other countries in the past, where it has?
Well, effectively. The question is effectively.
Effectively, right. Yeah, effectively. And I assume to the extent that where a new regime is more favorable to the U.S. being the ultimate goal, I presume.
I mean, Iraq and Afghanistan had successful regime changes. Ironically, for many years, Afghanistan was seen as the good war, but the institutions that the U.S. helped create and plant the seeds for remain. There are still regular elections, and there's still an Iraqi constitution. I mean, that was fought for, in my view, with a high cost, but they still exist. But the difference is that Afghanistan and Iraq were done with boots on the ground. And my view is that what makes this different is that we're not going to be doing peacekeeping and we're not going to be doing nation building. So right there, you eliminate a kind of magnet for external jihadists. There will be an insurgency probably at some point. I mean, we have to assume that there will be these true believers, although we are now into such an unknown because, this is a regime in many ways it's steeped in the kind of Shia notions of martyrdom. So you could argue that there are some people who, greeted death on a battlefield as a great end to their lives. I believe that some people get to that point psychologically, but not everyone does. But then if you're just like not a super Shia like martyr type in the system, part of it is also like of the promise of political Islam is that we in the Muslim world failed and we became backwards and second rate because we didn't govern ourselves organized by the principle of Islam, and Islam is our strength. That was the promise of Hassan al-Banna, but that was actually accomplished for the first time in the Islamic Revolution, even though a Shia and Sunni divide. There are important theological differences. I'm not denying that, but the concept of political Islam...
Hassan al-Banna being the creator of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right. So there are important theological distinctions, but the concept of political Islam, like, what our problem was before, we were not governing ourselves through the principles of Islam, and that's why we became second-rate powers and dominated by the rest of the world. And this is our path to restoring our glory. That's kind of the promise of political Islam. Well, if you are a mid-level IRGC officer, does this look like the promise has been fulfilled, or does it look like a catastrophe? And sometimes in history, catastrophes can have profound effects on ideological systems. Like, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were still communists in Russia, but like there's the sense that it was the inevitability that you would have a global workers' socialist revolution was finished. But nobody thought that, even in Moscow. So that's what I think we should account for, the fact that that's probably a likely scenario too. Maybe Moshtaba Khamenei, if he's still alive, wanted to be martyred. But I don't know. Does everybody around him want to be martyred? I'm not so sure. And what do they say? They look around, there's nothing but rubble. Their whole project of this state to have a nuclear weapon was destroyed in June, pretty much. Their proxy network, planted by and commanded by Qasem Soleimani, who was killed in 2020, is in ruins. I mean, this is the last stand for Hezbollah in Lebanon at this point. And unlike before, the Lebanese government wants to work with Israel to uproot Hezbollah. They now consider, for the first time, I never thought I would see this, effectively, that Hezbollah is kind of an occupying force. The amount of investment that the Iranians made in Bashar al-Assad, he's playing video games in a Moscow apartment right now. And I'm not a big fan of his replacement, but they don't have what they've watched their empire collapse. So at a certain point, maybe there are still lots of people who are drinking the Kool-Aid and they say Allah is testing us and we have to, this is the final test, and then we'll see, we'll have paradise on earth. I think a lot of people are probably looking around and it's like, wow, I'd like to enjoy my remaining years with my family and it's time to cut a deal. I would imagine that pressure is enormous right now. Add to that in the process of 47 years of exporting this so-called revolution, the Iranian regime neglected its own population, repressed its own population, stole from its own population. And so they were facing, before all of this, a potable drinking water crisis, just bank failures, all kinds of things, hyperinflation. So all of these things are just like every sign. Reality is like, you know what? Maybe you were wrong. Maybe this conviction that you had that Islam was the solution and Quran was the way was just wrong. And it's time for something else. And I think that killing leaders, losing a big war like this, that's the way that usually these things happen.
How do you imagine? You mentioned that the budding signs of cooperation between Israel and Lebanon against Hezbollah. To me, that's very much an end times signal. This is the first trumpet. This is almost scary because, like you said, I've never imagined this to happen. It's one of those things that the Lebanon government is showing a backbone and is starting to take itself seriously. I would love to see a Middle East where, if not peace, there is some meaningful detente between Israel and Lebanon, where, dare I imagine, a world where Israelis are once again allowed to travel to Iran. There's a whole recalibration of how this region understands itself, let alone how it does business, but how it even understands its place in the world. What are the visions that roll around in your head of what that future could look like, better or worse?
Better. And I see an opportunity for America to finally make a pivot to Asia and to decommission as many bases in the Middle East. And you know who I think fills the gap? Israel. Israel has proven in this war that it has a lethal and precise military capable of taking out the leadership and military of a regime 1,000 miles away. It needs to probably build some aircraft carriers, but I could see Israel in 10 years replacing America as the regional hegemon, the regional guarantor of stability and free navigation on shipping lanes. I think Israel could kind of be the regional superpower. I think that Turkey will be a competitor with Israel for that, and that could go in a lot of bad directions. There's always the opportunity to miss an opportunity in the Middle East, so maybe it won't go that way, but I think that you could see it. I mean, listen, right now, it's a fascinating thing. The cognoscenti of Europe and America, the New York Times, the Council on Foreign Relations, Vali Nasser, they all think this war is a disaster. And yet, the nation states that have the most skin in the game, the Gulf states that are being hit right now by the Iranian missiles, are shoulder to shoulder with Israel and America and are basically saying, finish the job. And what does that tell you? I mean, Qatar, I can't believe I'm going to say this. Did you notice that like 2 days ago, they just kicked out the entire military attaché office in Doha for the Iranians? Yeah, no, the Qataris are like no longer straddling the fence. They're fully against Iran at this point.
Right. That's not thanks to any smart diplomacy on the Israeli or American sides.
No, it's because of the Iranians. But what I'm saying, they miscalculated. I'm saying that the bet that Iran made was that with the slightest amount of pain, that the Gulf states would pressure Trump to end the war. Instead, you're seeing the messages from the Gulf states saying, no, finish the job.
So let's actually stick to this point, because this is then going to bring us to Europe. But starting here is really interesting. The reason that this happened, this miscalculation happened, I think, is related to the phenomenon of the past, of basically the post-World War II world, where deterrence became not deterrence from I have the bigger military, so you better listen to me, or, we both want to avoid the harm of war, but rather deterrence became only a game of fear of, quote, escalation. The idea of escalation became such a scary word, especially in the past 3 decades, post-Iraq war. Escalation in itself became the one thing that certainly the West, but to some extent the Arab world, is terrified of. And players, whether because they're more psychologically desperate, or because they're driven by martyrdom, or because they are just more comfortable with the idea of war, like Iran, for them, that becomes such a strong tool to punch way, way, way above their weight. Because Iran, with its system of proxies and its dinky weapons, and Russia as well, all they have to do is cause the slightest psychological dread among the comfortable West or the comfortable Gulf states that there is a risk of some escalation. And then that's a whole headache that you don't want to get into. And the West and the Gulf states and Europe will cave. So that was the calculation. That was the assumption. We've been able to bully the world for decades based on just the mere threat of potential escalation. Now, we are actually going to show them what escalation looks like. The interesting thing is that the moment you actually see what war looks like, the entire logic in the people getting hit changes. Now we're not afraid of escalation. Now we're pissed. And now we're going to lock arms against you, against the person who attacked us. You can no longer play the fear of escalation card once war actually plays out. So I think this is a really interesting thing that's happening in the Arab world. You see the Europeanized, supine background that existed in the Arab world of being afraid of, we hate Iran, we hate that they're bullying us around, but we would still rather condemn Israel than risk getting entangled in a real war. But once war meets you, the logic changes.
Well, think about this. The October 7th didn't break apart the Abraham Accords. And I would also argue, even though October 7th is a horrible tragedy for the Jewish people and Israel, in terms of what you were just saying there, Adam, it steeled the spine of Israel as a nation, which is to say, like, the Israelis are like, what, 90%, 93% behind the war, and they are facing, they have to go into their bomb shelters, they have to do all these things, and all of that is a price that Israelis at least are willing to pay because they understand the strategic value of finally knocking out and defanging, the head of the snake. And part of that, I think, was because October 7th was a reminder of oblivion and the abyss. And right there, like, that was the end of that advantage that you had to threaten prosperous societies with these lawless and terroristic attacks. And by the way, Russia's learning that lesson in a weird way in Ukraine. They've been terrorizing Ukraine, and Ukraine's still fighting them and still there and showing that it's capable of causing pain to Russia. We're living in a hinge moment in history in a lot of ways. And while I'm against the fact that Trump did not try to go to Congress. And my view is that, you could argue, well, he's following in the footsteps of Obama and, okay, fine. He's not the first president to, kind of further degrade the War Powers Act. At the same time, this is an imminently just war. And I do think it will create the possibility, the opportunity for America to finally get out of the Middle East. So this is we're in its heady days. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is what's at stake. And I think October 7th is a big part of that, because once you experience October 7th, that means that changes your calculation about the amount of sacrifice and pain you're willing to endure in order to remove the threat. And the threat ultimately was Iran.
Yeah, I mean, from an American perspective, even if Iran was an existential threat, it wasn't being felt as an existential threat by your average American.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm wondering about as like a layman watching, very little news every now and then, is trying to understand where, and this might segue us into Europe, but like, where are we in terms of our relations with our allies? Because I feel like as the world gets a bit more destabilized, with different regimes potentially toppling, obviously the capacity for war to continue and for America to be more involved or even vulnerable kind of increases. I am concerned about the status of our allyships around the world and to what extent we are positioned well to be able to, should a broader war kind of escalate, to be protected.
Why would you worry about that now?
Why would I worry about that now? In the context of Trump, I worry that it feels like we're kind of pushing allies away instead of bringing them closer. And maybe this is specific to a subset of allies versus others, but it makes me feel like we're kind of strong arming our way around.
Right. I mean, the best case for this point is, it was a little funny, although, listeners to Uncertain Things know what I think about the Europe geopolitically. It's even funny to say Europe geopolitically. It's like talking about ants in the context of real estate. It's like, okay. But Trump made the point that the NATO allies, the NATO countries are not stepping up to help free the Strait of Hormuz. Putting aside the fact that it's those allies that are mostly affected by the blockade, his point was, amusing, considering the fact that Trump spent his career pushing those allies away, always threatening to abandon NATO, and most recently, literally threatening to start a war with a NATO ally over Greenland. And you could say this was trolling, this was Trump testing the ground, whatever, but Trump was the one causing the disruption that led the European ants to scurry around and have to reimagine what their relationship to America is. And, as many people who were worried about this, even people who were very critical of the state of NATO and the state of Europe, were worried about Trump's behavior, suggested the Europeans and Canada then immediately turned to China. If we're going to live in a world where we're just being pushed around by bullies, we need to hedge our bets.
For like a day.
I mean, it was a very great day for Mark Carney to travel around. He seemed to have a heck of a day.
Yeah, I mean, if they were really going to make such a strategic shift, I mean, that's not a meeting and a press release. I mean, but
no, yeah, I don't think that they made the strategic shift to embrace China. I think they're hedging their bets more. They understand that they need to hedge their bets, that the Americans are not going to be a dependable ally, and there are two big bullies in the hood. So I need to play nice by both of them.
I think this war reestablishes that. I don't think, by the way, that people are part of alliances because, the bigger power asks nicely. I think it's because the bigger power establishes kind of dominance. Israel and America have demonstrated, I think, a generational advantage in terms of its military, what it's been able to do, especially if you broaden the aperture just slightly to include the Maduro raid what Israel was able to do against Hezbollah's leadership in 2024. You just go through the list of things that Israel has managed to accomplish that at this point, like, why would you bet on China, given that China's track record is that they treat their allies like vassal states? They usually try to lure them into debt traps, and it's completely exploitative. And I'm not taking anything away that China is a huge country and has a lot of money and it definitely has a lot of power. But when was the last time China was in a war? Well, we're in a war right now and we're dominating.
And Chinese technology is somewhat in the war right now and is not quite dominant.
Right. Well, I mean, certainly Russian technology is being discredited. It was discredited before. So I just think that's problem is going to kind of solve itself, and it'll solve itself when we have a different president than Trump. I don't think we'll ever have a president like Trump again. He has a unique style, obviously. It was shocking at first, and it sometimes is entertaining. I thought he was hilarious yesterday. Did you see him with the Japanese prime minister, Vanessa?
No, I did not. What
so
happened?
He's with the Japanese prime minister, and he's asked a question like, why didn't you tell anybody you were going to go to war like this? They're sitting there in the Oval, and he's taking questions, and he's like, we wanted a surprise. Japanese, all about surprises.
Oh, oh my God.
And then, like, what's the meme where they play the dum, 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 like, mic drop, I don't know, like.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, that's hilarious. And he is capable of these, like, incredible moments like that. And so I just think that, like, that you factor it in, you kind of have to grade it on a curve a little bit. I thought that I thought it was disgraceful what he was doing with Greenland, and I hated that. Okay. But I'm also not of the view that I like that. I'm in favor of the NATO alliance, but it's not as sacrosanct as some people have said. I mean, there are real problems with NATO that go beyond the percentage of GDP they spend on their military. I mean, I just don't think Germany has a military culture anymore. So, like, there was a survey of young Germans under 30. And I think the majority of them said they wouldn't fight if Germany was invaded to defend the country. Right. Well, there's something wrong with that. I mean, Israel is like a model country in that respect. Like, the country has huge divides. Before October 7th, they were at each other's throats over the judicial reform. And then they all managed to come together. And then they have huge divides over October 7th about whether to prioritize the return of the hostages or dismantling Hamas. And it looks terrible because they're so democratic. So everybody's always out there doing things and like that. And now it's like this war is happening and the whole country's behind it and they're willing to sacrifice for it. We're not like Israel. We have a volunteer army. We have a kind of our sense makers, our elites are convinced this is, Iraq 2.0 on steroids or whatever. And I just think that they're going to be discredited by events. I think we're winning. I don't, it's too soon to say yet, but I'm feeling so optimistic about it. And when I see some of the terrible arguments coming from the so-called experts, like getting rid of Khamenei is a huge mistake. Now Moshtaba is in charge and he's even more hardline. Like, as assuming like, oh yeah, Khamenei was like a real pragmatist. I mean, give me a break. These are all fanatics all the way down. We're doing the world a favor. Israel's doing the world a favor. And I don't think you can judge it until you sort of, now that we know what, an Israeli word, the concepcia is for the war, for Israel at least, then let's see. I think that doesn't sound totally crazy to me. In fact, I think it seems plausible. So let's see if that can work, if they can create the conditions for a color revolution. And if that happens, woe to Vali Nasser and his unearned reputation for foreign policy wisdom. Woe to Fareed Zakaria.
Yeah, I didn't see Fareed. Fareed is also, I was expecting Fareed to be a little more, I won't say hawkish, but supportive of the war.
No, they're all, the usual suspects are doing what they always do. They always are this whole, I think they're flustered.
Let's dig into this. The conversation about the conversation. I love how the Europe question was, again, basically dismissed as they'll follow where the power is.
They will. What choice do they have? Are they going to join Russia? Come on.
Right, exactly. Either they grow up and start taking care of themselves and then realize that they cannot keep doing business the way they did in the 40s.
Right, but I'm saying that's more than budget decisions.
Yeah, it's a cultural shift. Yeah, it's a cultural shift.
Right.
And there's no real will.
The British SAS is very good. The French Foreign Legion is good. The Finns know how to fight. The Swiss are armed, although they're not an offensive power. But if you try to invade Switzerland, good luck to you, sir. You know, so I don't know. Like there are a couple, but like I don't know. Like if you told me like there's an Italian and a Spanish division that we're gonna fight alongside, I'd be like, okay, well, I guess put them in charge of I don't know, guarding the
catering.
Catering, exactly. I mean, I'd much rather
really
have
good catering though.
I would much rather have an IDF
catering.
unit. I would much rather have an IDF unit helping me in an operation than a Spanish military unit for sure.
So the conversation about the conversation.
Yeah.
What, before we go into the Tucker Carlson universe, from the supposed adults in the media world and the expert class, what do you understand to be the cause of this confoundment, the flustering that you describe? Is it the attachment to internationalism in a way that doesn't, the sort of internationalism that is incapable of continent, that is unable to countenance escalation as a necessary thing, or is it a knee-jerk response to any American and Israeli aggression?
Or is it just Iraq, Afghanistan trauma?
I think it's all of it. I mean, I think some of it is just how can the guy who tweeted after Rob Reiner was murdered that he was a loser, never Trumper who didn't make any good movies be capable of anything good when he is, such a rotted husk of a soul, So there's that. Like, there's just a million reasons why you hate Trump, and you can't imagine Trump ever doing anything good. I just had a debate with Andrew Sullivan. It's on my feed and now his feed. It was last week. But that was one of the things Andrew said. I said, I pointed out that, Trump has said there's an opportunity for the Iranian people to take their country back. He said, he doesn't believe that. He's on the side of the dictators. Look at what he said about Tiananmen Square. That's true. But I'm saying, like, if that's your view, so some of it is just like people hate Trump. I get that. Okay. And Trump's not capable of anything good. The second part is like the lesson of Iraq is we can't do regime change wars anymore. We're not good at it. And this is just history is repeating and like, oh my God, it's another quagmire. And you remember all of the reasons why you hated the Iraq war, 15 years ago. And then I do think that there is also, in the case of Iran, especially for Democrats, they wanted to believe that the JCPOA, which was the Iran nuclear deal, was a crowning achievement of the Obama, second administration. I always like to say, you do have a crowning achievement. He killed bin Laden. That was great. But liberals have a hard time accepting that as the achievement. They want to say that the achievement was this diplomacy and the vision, the courage to do this, deal, and the Netanyahu and AIPAC were against it. And that's really where I think the roots of a lot of the Democratic enmity towards Israel comes from, is Netanyahu lobbying against the Iran deal. So they want to think that the Iran deal was the only way that you could have solved the problem, and that everything Trump has done on Iran is just making it much worse. And they really wanted to believe that was true. And it looks like I have a trolling side of my personality. So I would retweet things like, oh, they just killed the head of the IRGC. And I was like, we'll never get the JCPOA now, you know what I mean? That is a worldview.
CC Ben Rhodes.
It's hard to give up a worldview. It's hard to say I was
personally,
wrong.
all of those things that you outlined, I'm very sympathetic to all of them. They all resonate with me.
Yeah, exactly. You say, well, but maybe that was wrong. Maybe there was no deal to be had with these, medieval fanatical terrorists. And, the only way to handle the bully is to just wipe them out. And, it's like the fox knows many things. The hedgehog knows one thing, but, the one thing the hedgehog knows is true. And that's one of those, that's the moment, Pour
I mean,
one out
I want to
for
remind
Isaiah
to you,
Berlin.
as Vanessa pointed out in one of the recent podcasts, this entire show was created for me to badger the remaining leftism out of Vanessa. So in this particular account, it's just worth remembering that the JCPOA was signed within the context of what was it called then? The Green Revolution.
Right. It was after
the
the Green Revolution, but yes.
Right, exactly. But it was it was in the wake of the Green Revolution, which was which was the biggest uprising in Iran during the Obama administration by the anti-regime, free society, liberal part of Iran for free election.
That's right.
And they were brutally oppressed. This is probably where the first time that millennials encountered the besieged, like Western millennials encountered the besieged forces, heard them in the news because protesters were being mowed down and mass executed for calling for a free election, and Obama, in a very Obama fashion, was like doing a bit of a Yasser Arafat and talking from both sides of his mouth and saying both, well, this is very bad. We're very much pro-democracy, but we are absolutely going to do nothing and do a...
He never could bring himself to say the election in 2009 was stolen.
Right.
He did say something about Neda, the woman who was made famous, who was murdered by, in one of the peaceful protests.
Right.
And so he did do that, but he couldn't bring himself to say that. He still wrote a letter to the Supreme Leader saying, I want to make a deal so bad. He still ended, he zeroed out funding for our State Department democracy programs. Maybe they did good work.
And this is the thing that I want to remember for all those people clinging to their leftist belief in Obama. The people who are so disgusted by Trump, he doesn't do it for the right reasons. He doesn't really care about democracy. Well, the person whose rhetoric cared so much about democracy, in fact, cared much more about getting a deal that would cement the regime's power, and in order to get that deal was willing to look the other way from the brutal oppression of Iranian free society in 2009. So that it was a clear policy choice by the Obama administration to look the other way.
Their theory was that if you lifted the sanctions and you
give it long enough, let
the
arc of history do its thing, and things will.
But it was wrong. As soon as the Iranians signed the deal, they bolstered they bolstered Bashar al-Assad and his war against Syrian civilians and use of chemical weapons. That was Iran saved his regime. So the idea that this was, if you were nice to them, they were going to work. No, they were nice to them. You jet fueled their plans to surround Israel with a ring of fire of these fanatic proxy networks. So they were wrong.
It was more metaphysical. I think it wasn't that if you're nice to them, they're going to be nice to us. It was if you're nice to them, the inexorable force of democracy is just going to invade on its own, and a middle class is going to emerge from the sanction relief, and they're going to slowly, it might take a little longer, but the regime is going to topple because tyranny's got nothing to freedom. It is amazing just how theological the self-rationalization of the Obama era experts were.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the way, they were repeating the same faith-based reasoning as the Fukuyamists after the Cold War. The reason why we knitted Russia and China into the World Trade Organization is for the same reason. We just thought, ideological conflict was over. Everybody is going to become a democracy, and all you needed to do was introduce capital and prosperity to these places, and then democracy would follow. Not true. You ended up just enriching tyrannies.
So last point on our journey, Mr. Tucker Carlson, whom you've profiled and spent a good deal thinking, and I think you've known him in the past, right?
We went to the same liberal arts college.
Oh. Which one?
Trinity College, Bantams.
He, of course, is now representative of the faction on, I don't know if I can call it the MAGA right or the right-wing populist media sphere.
He would call them the America First wing of MAGA.
I want to hear you tell me the story of Tucker Carlson from the days of knowing him to today and what we're looking at especially as it pertains to foreign policy?
Well, I'm not a psychologist.
But you're a student of human nature. You're an observer of human nature.
Okay, I think, I don't know, I can't give you exactly why Tucker has turned into the 21st century Father Coughlin, but I can say that it's peculiar that he has become, a voice for this idea that there is, that Jews or people who support Israel are kind of a fifth column in the country that have hijacked the American interest or distorted, are acting not in the American interest, when by his own admission, like 6 days ago, the man was like saying he was in contact with Iranians, at least of interest to the CIA, that they would be spying on them. So it wasn't like he was just talking to random Iranian citizens. And if you look at his show and what he says, he often sounds no different in substance than the Iranian foreign minister. And yet he's out here selling this he's selling a bill of goods that says that I'm the one who's not a patriotic American. We're in the middle of a war right now. And, your show, substantively doesn't sound much different than Iranian propaganda at this point. He's somebody who is constantly meeting as not for on the record interviews, but he's meeting with, he goes to Qatar and Saudi Arabia and meets with their senior people. Who are you, Tucker Carlson? So it's interesting to me.
I wanted to be clear that you, like me, that you think very sharply that does not justify him being persecuted or in any way.
No, I wrote that in my column.
Yeah. I wanted to be clear that anybody who listens who doesn't know the context, like Eli is one of the strongest defenders of free expression and against politicized persecution.
Yeah, but I just find it interesting that he's the one who kind of wants to argue that, the Iran war was a result of Israel tricking, Netanyahu into launching this disastrous, quagmire disaster or whatever. And yet he's the one that has repeated at face value the propaganda of America's enemies. I mean, one of them is that he is now on this idea that through Chabad or whoever, that Israel wants to rebuild the third temple. Well, I happen to know a lot about this. This is a lie that was first put forward by Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. I'm sorry, but if you're Mr. America First super patriot, if you're the Winter Soldier, why are you repeating the propaganda of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem? So I am now almost bemused that somebody who has ended up in his ideological journey repeating the talking points of America's enemies, whether it's Alexander Dugin, the philosopher and kind of, advisor to Vladimir Putin, or it's making, or when he was, supporting Qatar, Turkey, you go through the list and how is that the America First position? It's a joke. And I think because Tucker himself is a kind of norm violator, but he attacks people who, have been loath to violate norms on their own side. We should say this clearly. It's who you calling? You're questioning my loyalties? Look in the mirror, buddy. You're pathetic.
Putting aside the absurdity of him hiding behind America First as an ideology,
right?
I mean, that's almost transparent that his entire policy now is much more in line with Noam Chomsky heuristic of
right. You're a conservative and you sound like Noam Chomsky.
Well, no, it's just not just a conservative. America worst.
Yeah, America last. Yeah.
If America is involved, then America is to blame. America is my litmus test. But the interesting thing is, what does he represent as a cultural energy on, I don't know if I can call it the right, but whatever attention that he's massing, and we know we can't really do the numbers with view counts because we don't know what's real, what's not. But it's undeniable that that he gets traffic. It's undeniable that he has the attention of people across the board now. So many public leftists are falling in love with Tucker Carlson. Mehdi Hassan keeps being surprised at how much he's into the new Tucker Carlson the moment he started talking about Jews. So, we're seeing that there is almost more than Trump did. Like, Tucker is creating his own media realignment. I'm interested in what that represents without dismissing it just as, the anti-American crowd and I certainly don't want to use the phrase fifth column, not to be sued for trademark infringement, but I do want to understand it better. I want to see should I be concerned? Are we really witnessing a new Father Coughlin movement who is going to be fist shaking at the Jews and want to retreat America from having any kind of liberal role in the world?
Well, yes, there was reason to be alarmed in 2024 because Tucker Carlson was very close to President Trump and helped persuade him to pick J.D. Vance as the vice president. There's always going to be Americans who tune in to conspiracy theories and crankery and other nonsense. And maybe some of his audience disagree with him vehemently, but he's a good broadcaster and they like to be riled up. That's possible. I mean, I find myself occasionally being fed on X like Nick Fuentes clips, and I have to acknowledge that he's a loathsome little man, but it's a damn good broadcaster, and sometimes he can be quite funny.
But damn, that cretin has talent.
He does. He does. And Tucker has talent. But my point is that I don't think you're ever going to get to a point where he's not going to have an audience. People like him. The issue is not that he has an audience. The issue is that he has suction with the Republican Party, and that a year ago, no Republican would dare criticize him because he was so powerful, because he had all this influence with the president and he had all this influence with the Trump administration. A year later, Trump seems to have kicked him off the island. He's had a public break with Tucker. He says, I don't listen to a word he says. I'm MAGA. They're not MAGA. Speaking of Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson. And then, the cherry on top of the sundae was a week ago, he put out a Truth Social defending Mark Levin, who Tucker absolutely loathes. So, I add all that up and I say, you know what? I think we're doing okay. Because as long as the Republican Party is not going to be influenced by this charlatan, then, there's only so much you can do. We live in a country, we have free speech. People can tune in. If Tucker wants to run, I don't think he will do very well. I think his power was if he could have taken over like the husk of the Republican Party after Trump left the scene. That was, I think, the plan with J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance is in a terrible position right now because his boss, Trump, is at odds with his best friend, Tucker, and he's eventually going to have to choose. And I think right now he's trying to keep his head down and wait it out, but I'm not so sure it's necessarily going to go away.
But what happens when Trump leaves and the new power vacuum of American politics opens up? We already know that the Nazi gravitational pull has caught even mainstream Democrats at this point, with Gavin Newsom being all in with the AIPAC conspiracism and this becoming more and more of a flashpoint on left-wing primaries. What happens on the right?
It's too soon to tell, but I think if the war goes well, then that's yet another moral panic that, the isolationist right was all wrong about. Eventually that catches up to them. And if Trump kind of runs out the rest of his term, making it clear that he's the alternative and he is successful, that's the best you can hope for. If it's disaster, then people are looking for alternatives, then God help us. But the only way out at this point is through, But again, as I just want to reiterate, Trump is now at odds openly. He's publicly feuding with Tucker. That's a good thing. And at least the early polls on the Iran war show that the Republican Party is with Trump. Trump's the indispensable man. J.D. Vance will need Trump to win the primary. If he is still feuding with Tucker, then J.D. Vance can't he's in an impossible situation. He can't win with his friendship with Tucker at that point. So, and the other thing I would just point out is that these Cretans, are not unifying. I mean, Nick Fuentes is having a field day with the resignation of this guy, Joe Kent. He's criticizing Joe Kent, and Tucker is saying...
Joe Kent was an aide to Tulsi Gabbard, who resigned.
Yeah, he was the head of the National Counterterrorism Center.
And he resigned a couple of days ago, saying that in protest of the war is being and now is being exalted by the left and the Tucker universe as the first hero to stand up to this illegal, immoral war.
Right. It was like reading a comment on like 4chan on official government stationery. It was like unbelievable. Like, while the war is manufactured by Israel, like just
right.
Garbage. Anyway, I mention all this because if the war goes well, then I think these people look like idiots. And, that's the beginning of how to kind of get our country back. And I just would point out populist moments. We're in a populist moment right now. I think I've said this on the show before. They burn out. They do not. That's not a new reality. People, even though Andrew Jackson, who was the first populist president, and I believe the last one before Trump, did succeed in getting rid of the national bank. But guess what? Like 30 years later, eventually we did end up having a national bank. We got out of the mood of that Andrew Jackson tapped into in the 1820s, and eventually we kind of went back and it wasn't a big deal after a while. So my hope is that we're burning, the populist moment is burning out. And as I said before, Fuentes is chopping their heads off. And we'll see if they're all going to sort of, align. I mean, you really want Candace Owens in your coalition? That woman's crazy. She really is like mentally nuts. She's a mental patient. She's, it's beyond the Jewish stuff, which is disgusting. She's not like, I really would like to know what percentage of our audience are just there to watch the car crash. You know what I mean? Like, as opposed to, this woman's telling the truth.
Did the ice melting conspiracy take off? Are there now people who are worried that ice melts at 30?
But she said she doesn't know. I didn't know that.
We live in a wonderful time.
Have you heard the new Bruno Mars album?
No.
Nope. Is it good?
Yeah, I like it. I think it's really good. He's not
I like it.
He's not a profound artist. He's doing kind of. It's a little bit of a pastiche, but he does it very well, and I like it. There.
That's his mood. He's always kind of doing that, like, homage to past artists.
I like that his previous album was very Motown-y, because I feel like we're in time for a Motown revival, and I think Eli is almost single-handedly responsible for some of the Motown revival.
Oh, I'm very happy for a Motown revival.
Would love it. Sure, we love it. Yeah.
Well, Eli Lake, check him out.
Thank you, Adam and Vanessa. Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Uncertain Things. Follow us on uncertain.substack.com or wherever you get your podcasts. If you're feeling generous, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and share us with your friends and enemies. Until next time, stay sane.